I can't quite believe we are here for our last Sunday, and that's obviously an emotional moment. And actually, when it comes to actually preaching, both of those passages are really, bring lots to mind, and there's a lot that resonates for me personally and for us. But as you know, I rather love an Old Testament reading, for those of you who've been here. So as it's my last time, I thought we'd go Old Testament. I might go on a fraction longer than 10 minutes. Please forgive me if I do. So there we go. Elijah. Times change. None of us grow any younger, do we? And here we go again with Elijah. Now let's just think a little bit about the context. We've heard over the last few weeks about Elijah's sort of mountaintop moment, his Mount Carmel moment, where he completely overcomes the prophets of Baal and brings down fire and demonstrates the power of the Lord in a way not seen in his generation, and indeed rarely seen at all. And after that, he gets the adrenaline dumps and goes into a huge depression, and he's rushed away and hidden in the cave, and he's also had his moment where the Lord has come to him and called him forward. And that's the context we find him at the moment. And as Elijah was called forward at that moment, the Lord commissions him again for a different phase of his life. And I am sure that all of us who've been through the phases of life where things have gone well and then things have needed to change have had those moments of reassessment and reflection. And I think that's what we see in Elijah as he's been through that depression and through that reassessment and reflection. And I think it is fairly clear that not only God told him that he couldn't do this on his own going forward, but that he knew that for himself, that he realised that there needed to be someone to pass the baton on to. And that, I think, would have been something that he knew well and was in his mind when he was told by God that there was going to be someone, and the name Elisha was given to him. Now that reassessment doesn't mean he's going to let up on his own prophetic call. He's not going into retirement. He's actually going to have a really active ministry going forward. There's a king to anoint, several battles to pray for, another few kings to anoint, and lots of kings to tell that they're going wrong. His core calling remains, and he is going to exercise that calling, but in a different way, and not on his own. And so he sets off, but he's got his eyes open for finding Elisha. Now when we hear from God, however we hear from God, and we all hear differently, you very, very rarely hear the sort of words or see the sort of light from heaven that Paul saw. When we think, yes, we know, and he may well have known Elisha. He may well have been part of one of the congregations that Elijah had come across in his travels. I'm sure, as well as hearing that in his head, it's Elisha next, I think that he probably also was looking for other signs, and that's certainly something I found along the very long road towards ordination in my case. There's a lot of testing and checking for yourself and other people checking you. It's not, a straight road. And so he would have been looking for signs that, yeah, it really is Elisha. And you probably didn't necessarily specifically spot. But the fact that Elisha was ploughing 12 oxen, I don't think was an accident. Because of course there were the 12 tribes of Israel. And those sort of signs They're signs to us in the story, but would have been a sign on the road had Elijah seen Elisha with those 12 oxen and that he was behind them. Of course, if you're driving a team of oxen, you drive from behind, not from the front, don't you? You don't stick yourself out in front, you're behind, guiding your team. And so Elisha was doing what he was going to be doing in his new role. He was guiding the 12 tribes, in a sense. And we then see the mantle. Now, this is no ordinary cloak, the mantle. I mean, this cloak has been with Elijah on Mount Carmel. He's rolled it up and struck water that has parted for him. I suspect it was quite battered, like Elijah was at the time. I think it was a battered cloak. But of course we have taken the phrase from this passage of the Bible about the mantle being passed on, and the sign in the Bible of a mantle is a sign of God's power and authority. And so casting the mantle over Elijah was a sign that he was going to be given some form of authority, and that he would have been looking out for his own calling. Now for Elisha, again, I don't think it was, I think he'd obviously been praying, he'd obviously been looking, he's quite a young man, there's no wife mentioned, there's a mother and father mentioned. But he's got a wealthy inheritance. I mean, 12 oxen is quite a lot of oxen, basically. He didn't need to leave. He didn't need to go. But he heard the call from Elijah, and when he heard that call, he responded. But again, that sort of stopping and checking. You know, there's my family. I need to go and kiss my parents goodbye. And goodbyes are hard, as Nigel said. I think, just a slight digression, there's a slight dissonance when you look at the fact that Elijah actually, when he says, I've got to do that, Elijah says, yes, go, you know, just go. And I think Elijah was having a moment as well. It was like he wouldn't wish on his worst enemy the sheer heaviness of the call that had been given to him. You know, being a prophet to Israel was no easy task. It's like he wouldn't wish it on his worst enemy. Look, no, that's fine. You know, don't worry, you can go back. It sounds different from what Jesus says in that gospel reading that we had, didn't it? Where we've got those 3 examples of people who hear the call but then don't quite respond. But I think that this was in a different context. And we can see that Elisha wasn't resiling from the call. It was a farewell. I think we can see that in that last bit of that passage where he slaughters the oxen. And they have a feast, a monumental barbecue. I'm told we get hog roast next week at the Bishop's Palace as the ordinands and family's lunch. So we'll be doing that. But he slaughters the oxen, and they have the most wonderful feast. But of course, once the oxen are slaughtered, he cannot turn back. There is no plough to continue to plough. In that way, he has to plough his way forward. And in a way, he has to take up a new plough, just as the disciples had to fish for a new kind of fish. He has to plough a new furrow. And I think that is the type of resonance that we can see there, and the fact that he then did, as Jesus said in the very final verse of that gospel, he put his hand to the plough that the Lord had called him to. And that's his call. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to say goodbye, but we say goodbye to a church that is also, I think, being called to put its hand to a new plough. this church, as the whole church of God, and not just the Church of England, in this country, has been through its time of doubt and depression in COVID. And it's called to plough its furrow in a new way. And I know this church is looking, as it looks as its 5-year vision, to what is God calling us, what's the mantle that's being cast upon us as we follow the Lord Jesus forward here in a slightly different way. We all have new mantles to take on ourselves, not just Andrew and I, as we go a little bit further north from here, and hopefully not in such a way that we won't see you again, because we've totally loved our time here and we felt so welcomed. But we all have to put our hand to our different ploughs, to take on our next steps and to do what the Lord calls us. And I just want to thank you so much for the welcome that you've given us. Deacon ordination is ordination into a servant form of leadership, serving your incumbent, and that's what I've tried to do here with Mark. You're lucky to have Mark and Nigel helping him as well. This is a congregation that loves the Lord, and where people love the Lord and worship the Lord in spirit and truth, and you do, and the worship here of all the congregation and all the choir has resonated in our hearts as a worship in spirit and truth. You can know that the Lord will be with you just as he will be with us as we go into our next phase. So thank you with all your hearts for putting up with us, for welcoming us, for loving us. And we'll carry you in our hearts.